Before Rome ruled the world, before Jerusalem shaped faith, there was Babylon, a city so powerful. It survived not in stone, but in scripture. Chapter 1. The birth of the first empire. Long before crowns, before thrones, before the idea of a nation even existed, humanity learned one simple truth. Power flows where water flows. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, a land was born that would change the direction of civilization forever. The Greeks would later call it Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, but to the people who lived there, it was survival carved from mud, sweat, and stone. Seasonal floods destroyed homes and fields without warning. Crops vanished overnight. Chaos was natural. Order was not. And so, for the first time in human history, order was engineered. This was the world that gave rise to Babylon, not as a city of legend, but as a system, a method, a radical experiment in how humans could rule not only land, but one another. Babylon did not begin with walls or towers. It began with control. Control of water. Canals were dug. Dams were built. Fields were mapped. Whoever commanded irrigation commanded life itself. From this control emerged authority, and from authority, hierarchy. This was not a kingdom of warriors. It was an empire of administrators. By the early second millennium BCE, Babylon had grown from a regional settlement into the political heart of Mesopotamia. Its rise was neither sudden nor accidental. It was calculated. At the center of this transformation stood Hammurabi. Often remembered simply as a king, Hammurabi was something far more revolutionary. He was an architect of governance. Under his rule, Babylon expanded not only its territory, but its influence over how societies functioned. For the first time, laws were not whispered traditions or tribal customs. They were carved into stone. The Code of Hammurabi did not promise equality. It promised predictability. Justice was not fair by modern standards, but it was fixed. Crimes had consequences. Contracts had weight. Authority had limits, written, visible, permanent. This was unprecedented. Babylon's power did not rely solely on armies. It relied on systems, taxation, census records, property rights, trade regulations, courts, bureaucracy. In Babylon, power became institutional. Merchants traveled under standardized rules. Farmers knew what they owed. Priests, officials, and governors operated within a defined hierarchy. The empire did not depend on the mood of a ruler. It functioned through structure. This is why Babylon matters. Every empire that followed, Assyrian, Persian, Roman, would borrow from this blueprint. Some perfected it. Others weaponized it. But none escaped it. Babylon proved that civilization could be engineered. Yet this achievement carried a hidden cost. As the system grew stronger, the individual grew smaller. Loyalty shifted from tribe to state. Faith began to intertwine with power. Temples became economic centers. Gods were no longer just worshipped, they were administered. In Babylon, belief itself became organized. The city's skyline reflected this transformation. Ziggurats rose above the flat plains, not merely as places of worship, but as symbols of centralized authority. They connected heaven, earth, and state in a single structure. Babylon was no longer just where people lived. It was where the world was managed. And with management came ambition. The first empire did not ask whether humans should hold such power. It only asked how. This question, left unanswered, would echo across centuries. Because Babylon did something no civilization had done before. It taught humanity how to rule on a massive scale, how to systematize life, how to turn chaos into control. But in doing so, it planted the seed of a recurring dilemma, one that empires would wrestle with long after Babylon's walls turned to dust. When power becomes a system, who controls the system? That question was born in Babylon, and history would spend the rest of its time trying to answer it. Chapter 2. The tower that challenged heaven empires are not always born from conquest. Some are born from a single idea. In the ancient memory of humanity, there is a story that refuses to fade, a story not of war, but of ambition, a story where unity itself becomes dangerous. According to the Hebrew Bible, the world once spoke with one voice, one language, one purpose. Humanity gathered on the plains of Shinar in the heart of Mesopotamia and made a decision that would echo far beyond stone and mortar. They would build upward. The Tower of Babel was not described as a fortress or a palace. It was a declaration. Brick by brick, humans attempted to compress the distance between earth and heaven. This was not about shelter, it was about permanence, about legacy. Let us make a name for ourselves, the text records. In that sentence lies the heart of Babylon's symbolism. The tower represented a shift in human thinking. Survival was no longer enough. Humanity now sought transcendence through its own hands. Technology replaced humility. Unity replaced obedience. The materials themselves carried meaning. Stone was scarce in Mesopotamia, so bricks were baked and sealed with bitumen. Artificial stone, manufactured strength, a civilization no longer shaped by nature, but shaping nature itself. This was not merely construction, it was control. From a historical perspective, such towers were not fantasy. Ziggurats dominated Mesopotamian cities, massive stepped structures, visible for miles, designed to bridge the divine and the earthly. They were centers of ritual, storage, administration, and authority. In Babylon, architecture became ideology. But the biblical narrative does not condemn the tower for its height. It condemns it for its intention. The problem was not building upward. It was believing nothing stood above them. According to the story, divine intervention shattered humanity's unity. Language fractured. Communication collapsed. The builders scattered across the earth, carrying fragments of a once shared identity. Babylon, in this account, becomes the birthplace of division. Yet beneath the theology lies a deeper warning. The story is not about God fearing human success. It is about power fearing accountability. A unified humanity, governed by a single will, guided by a centralized ambition, this was something unprecedented and potentially uncontrollable. The Tower of Babel symbolizes the moment when human organization began to rival natural limits, when coordination itself became a force capable of reshaping the world. From this perspective, the fall of Babel was not a punishment, it was a safeguard. Babylon had discovered something dangerous: scale, the ability to mobilize thousands toward a single goal. The capacity to erase individuality in favor of collective identity, the means to turn belief into infrastructure. This discovery would define every empire that followed. Language, once fractured, became a tool of control. Laws, rituals, and narratives evolved separately across regions, shaping cultures that could be managed, taxed, and ruled. Ironically, the very fragmentation meant to weaken humanity became the foundation of civilization. Babylon's tower never needed to reach the heavens to succeed. Its true legacy was psychological. It taught humanity that unity, when unchecked, can become tyranny. That ambition, when unbalanced, leads to collapse. That power without restraint invites intervention, whether divine, natural, or internal. The ruins of Babel are not marked on any definitive map. Archaeologists debate its location. Historians argue over its form. Some claim it never existed as described, but its meaning does not require physical proof. The Tower of Babel exists wherever power seeks immortality. Wherever systems grow so large, they forget the individuals within them. Wherever humans believe they can engineer eternity. Babylon did not fall when the tower collapsed. It fell when ambition replaced humility. And that lesson, etched not in stone, but in scripture, would return again and again, haunting empires long after Babylon's name faded from the earth. Chapter 3. The Golden City of Sin and Power. At its height, Babylon did not look like a warning. It looked like a miracle. Rising from the flat plains of Mesopotamia, the city shimmered under the sun, its walls glazed in blue, its gates adorned with lions and dragons, its avenues wide enough for armies and processions. Travelers did not speak of Babylon in whispers. They spoke of it in awe. This was no longer the city of canals and laws. This was the capital of excess. Under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon entered its most dazzling age. Conquests expanded its borders, tribute poured into its treasuries, and prisoners from distant lands were forced to build the empire that had defeated them. Power became visible. The Ishtar Gate stood as a declaration, not of faith, but of dominance. Brick reliefs gleamed with color. Processional roads guided rituals that fused religion with spectacle. The city itself became theater. Wealth was no longer hidden. It was performed. Gold flowed through Babylon's markets, spices, textiles, precious stones, and slaves arrived from every corner of the known world. Merchants prospered, officials grew powerful. The distance between ruler and subject widened. Inequality hardened into structure. Babylon's greatness depended on an unseen foundation. Forced labor. Captives from conquered kingdoms were relocated, their identities erased, their skills repurposed. Among them were the exiles of Jerusalem, whose trauma would later shape some of the most enduring biblical texts. For them, Babylon was not glorious. It was suffocating. In the Hebrew scriptures, Babylon becomes more than a city. It becomes a moral antagonist, a place where arrogance thrives, where power mocks the sacred, where kings elevate themselves beyond human limits. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a golden statue reflects this transformation, an empire that sees itself as eternal, an authority that demands worship. Here, sin is not indulgence alone. It is the belief that power answers to nothing beyond itself. Religion in Babylon did not restrain the state. It served it. Temples accumulated wealth, priests legitimized authority. Gods were woven into the machinery of rule, ensuring obedience through fear and ritual. Faith became administration. This fusion of belief and empire produced stability, but at a cost. Dissent vanished. Individual conscience dissolved. Loyalty was measured not by ethics, but by submission. Babylon perfected spectacle as control. Festivals distracted the masses. Architecture overwhelmed the senses. Grandeur replaced justice. And yet, beneath the surface, cracks formed. Empires that rise on exploitation must spend enormous energy maintaining illusion. Rebellions simmered in silence. The machinery of power grew heavy, slow, dependent on constant expansion. The more Babylon consumed, the more it needed to survive. Ancient prophets did not predict Babylon's fall through invasion alone. They described decay, pride preceding collapse, indulgence preceding ruin. Babylon's greatest weakness was not its enemies. It was its self-image. The city believed its wealth made it invincible. Its walls were massive, its armies disciplined, its gods powerful. But its system had become brittle, unable to adapt, unwilling to question itself. When the Persian forces entered Babylon with minimal resistance, the world was stunned. The Golden City did not burn in a final, heroic stand. It surrendered. The fall was quiet. Babylon's legacy, however, did not end with conquest. Its image transformed. In later scripture, Babylon becomes shorthand for corruption itself, a symbol of power divorced from morality, not because it was rich, but because it confused wealth with righteousness. The Golden City did not fall because it sinned. It fell because it believed sin had no consequences. And in that belief, Babylon carved its most enduring lesson, one that would echo far beyond its shattered gates, warning every empire that followed. Chapter 4. The City of the Test. In the Qur'an, Babylon is remembered differently. It is not introduced as a city of conquest, nor condemned as a kingdom of excess. Instead, it appears briefly, almost quietly, yet with profound weight. Not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a test. The reference comes in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 102. It speaks of a time when people accused prophets of sorcery, confusing divine wisdom with forbidden knowledge. In that confusion, Babylon emerges as a setting where something dangerous unfolds, not power, but choice. Two figures are mentioned, Harut and Marut. They are not kings. They command no armies. They build no towers. Their presence is subtle, yet decisive. According to the verse, they teach knowledge, but with a warning. They do not deceive. They do not compel. They caution. This is only a trial, they say. Do not misuse what you learn. In this framing, Babylon becomes a classroom of moral consequence. Knowledge itself is not condemned. The danger lies in intention, in how power is used once it is understood. This is a critical distinction. Unlike earlier portrayals that focus on empire and arrogance, the Quranic lens shifts inward. The battlefield is no longer a city or a tower. It is the human conscience. Babylon is not the source of corruption. It is the place where corruption is revealed. Magic in this context is not spectacle. It is manipulation, the ability to influence outcomes, to bend reality for personal gain, to fracture relationships, to dominate through hidden means. The verse specifically mentions the separation of spouses, an intimate destruction, not a public one. Power that enters the private sphere. Control that erodes trust. Here, Babylon represents the moment when knowledge outpaces ethics. Unlike the biblical narrative, there is no dramatic collapse, no divine punishment falling from the sky. Instead, responsibility is placed squarely on human choice. People learn, but they choose misuse. They proceed, not out of ignorance, but desire. The test is failed not because knowledge exists, but because restraint does not. This portrayal reframes Babylon entirely. It is no longer a city cursed by God, but a mirror held up to humanity, a place where humans are given access, warned of consequences, and left to decide. Power, once again, is neutral. Intention is not. In this sense, Babylon becomes universal. It is not bound to geography or time. Any society that reaches advanced understanding, whether scientific, economic, or political, faces the same trial. Will knowledge serve justice or dominance? Will insight produce humility or arrogance? The Quranic narrative refuses to absolve humanity by blaming cities, empires, or even devils. Responsibility remains personal, Moral failure is not imposed, it is chosen. This is why Babylon's presence in the Qur'an is so restrained. It does not need embellishment. Its role is precise. It marks the threshold where humans can no longer claim innocence. Earlier civilizations struggled against nature. Later empires struggled against each other. But Babylon introduces a new struggle: humans against themselves. The city of the test is not remembered for what it built or destroyed, but for what it revealed. That power, when stripped of accountability, does not announce itself as evil. It presents itself as opportunity. Babylon's lesson in this tradition is not about downfall. It is about discernment. Because the greatest danger is not ignorance, it is knowing and choosing wrongly. And that choice, once made, does not belong to Babylon alone. It follows humanity wherever knowledge travels, waiting for the next civilization to face the same test. Chapter 5. Mystery Babylon. By the time Babylon appears in the final book of the Bible, it is no longer a city, it is a symbol. The book of Revelation speaks of mystery, Babylon the Great, not as geography, but as an idea, a force, a system that transcends borders and eras. Whatever Babylon once was in stone, it has now become something far more dangerous in meaning. Here, Babylon wears no crown and flies no banner. It operates through influence rather than armies, through seduction rather than law. It is described as wealthy, intoxicating, and corrupting, not through violence alone, but through excess. Power wrapped in luxury, control disguised as prosperity. This Babylon does not conquer by force, it convinces. Revelation's imagery is deliberate. Gold cups filled with abominations, merchants growing rich from indulgence, kings entangled in alliances. The language is symbolic, but the warning is unmistakable. When power and wealth merge without restraint, collapse follows. In this narrative, Babylon is not condemned for belief, culture, or strength. It is condemned for replacing meaning with consumption, truth with spectacle, accountability with pleasure. Mystery. Babylon represents a civilization that has lost its moral center while convincing itself it has never been stronger. Unlike earlier depictions, this Babylon does not openly defy heaven. It quietly ignores it. Its greatest weapon is comfort. People do not fear Mystery Babylon. They depend on it. They benefit from it. They excuse it. And in doing so, they become complicit. This is why Revelation does not describe Babylon's fall as tragic. It is described as sudden and deserved. The system collapses not because it is attacked, but because it is hollow. The merchants mourn, not the people. This distinction matters. Babylon's final form is not an empire built on territory, but on desire. Its borders are psychological. Its reach is cultural. Its authority comes from shaping values rather than enforcing laws. It thrives wherever success is measured solely by wealth, wherever morality becomes optional, wherever power avoids responsibility by dispersing blame. In this sense, Mystery Babylon is not a prophecy tied to one moment. It is a recurring pattern. The text does not demand identification. It offers recognition. Readers are not told where Babylon is. They are asked whether they are living within it. This transformation marks Babylon's most complete evolution, from city to empire to symbol, from a place people could flee to a system they might unknowingly serve. And this is what makes Mystery Babylon terrifying. You cannot overthrow it with rebellion. You cannot destroy it with armies. It dissolves only when belief changes, when values shift, when societies choose restraint over excess. The fall described in Revelation is swift because it is internal. The illusion collapses. Confidence evaporates. What seemed eternal reveals itself as fragile. Babylon falls in a single hour, not because enemies breach its walls, but because truth exposes its emptiness. This final image reframes everything that came before. The tower, the empire, the test. Each was a step toward abstraction. Each moved Babylon further away from stone and closer to ideology. Mystery Babylon is the warning at the end of the story. It reminds humanity that the most dangerous empires are not those that dominate land, but those that shape desire. That the greatest corruption does not announce itself as evil, but as normal. Babylon no longer needs walls. It only needs acceptance. And once it is accepted, it no longer belongs to history. It belongs to everyone. Chapter 6. The Empire That Never Fell. Babylon fell. Its walls were breached, its temples emptied, its streets faded into dust. Empires replaced it, then vanished in turn. On the surface, the story appears complete. But history tells a different truth. Babylon did not disappear. It transformed. What collapsed in stone survived in structure. What vanished in geography endured in mindset. Babylon became a pattern, rebuilt wherever humans sought absolute control without restraint. This is why Babylon never truly fell. Every civilization that followed inherited fragments of its design: centralized authority, codified law, engineered belief, economic dominance. The machinery of order refined and perfected across centuries. These tools are not inherently evil, they are necessary. Civilization depends on them. The danger begins when systems forget their purpose. Babylon's legacy was not oppression alone, it was normalization. The ability to make excess appear justified, to make inequality seem natural, to frame exploitation as stability. When this happens, collapse no longer arrives with fire and invasion. It arrives quietly. Empires stop listening, they stop questioning, they begin to confuse longevity with righteousness. This was Babylon's final lesson. Scripture remembers Babylon not because it was powerful, but because it crossed a line. It blurred the boundary between governance and worship, between wealth and virtue, between control and truth. Once those boundaries dissolve, power becomes self-reinforcing. Criticism is treated as threat, dissent as disorder, morality as inconvenience. At that point, the empire no longer needs enemies. It begins consuming itself. The most haunting aspect of Babylon's story is its familiarity. The language changes, the symbols evolve, the structures modernize, but the logic remains. Promise security, offer prosperity, demand loyalty, discourage reflection. Babylon thrives wherever people are encouraged to trade conscience for comfort. This is why Babylon endures in religious memory, not as ancient history, but as a diagnostic tool, a way to identify when power has lost its anchor. The Bible presents Babylon as a warning written in metaphor. The Qur'an presents it as a test rooted in choice. Together, they converge on a single truth. The greatest threat to humanity is not chaos, it is unexamined order. An order so efficient it no longer asks why it exists, so powerful it forgets whom it serves, so convincing it no longer tolerates doubt. Babylon was the first empire to prove that control could be systematized. Every empire after it has faced the same temptation, to become permanent, unquestionable, complete. None succeeded. Not because empires are doomed to fail, but because human beings resist being reduced to components. Babylon's empire never fell because it was defeated. It fell because it was exposed. And exposure is something power cannot survive. The moment people see systems clearly, without spectacle, without myth, without fear, Babylon loses its grip. This is the ending Revelation offers. Not destruction, but awakening. A recognition that no system, no matter how grand, can replace conscience. That no empire, no matter how efficient, can escape accountability. Babylon remains not as a destination, but as a warning sign. A reminder that civilizations do not collapse when they are attacked. They collapse when they forget why they were built. And that is why Babylon still matters. Because the empire that never fell is not behind us. It is always waiting, to be recognized or to be repeated. Unlock history's darkest secrets. Subscribe to Midnight Empire and never miss a story.